Good afternoon, everyone, and morning for those in Alaska if you're on. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So let me know if you don't see it. Actually, I don't know if you can speak, but hopefully you'll be able to see my screen, and then we'll get started a little bit after 3 to let people come on. Okay. Hi, everyone joining. I'm just going to wait, I think a couple more minutes. Yeah, we'll wait until 3:03 to get started so more people can join, but I appreciate you all getting on for today. And thanks, Benjamin, for putting your information in there. If anyone else wants to put information about who they are and which tribe they're representing, that would be really helpful just to know who's all on here. And then, okay. Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to get started today. Today, we're going to be discussing, just giving some background information about Tiwahe and the fiscal year 23 expansion that we sent a Dear Tribal Leader letter out for at the end of May. Just some reminders, this webinar is recorded, and I will be having our representatives put a copy of this webinar as well as the slide deck on the Tiwahe website by the end of the week. So you guys have access to it and you can share it around for people that were not able to attend. If you could please submit your questions through the Q&A box. I see many of you using it to introduce yourself. We will be going through those questions at the end of the webinar. General questions not addressed during the webinar, we will have a list of all the registrants and we will be able to email those answers to those questions, but I'll also put those answers on the website. And then if there's any questions specific to individuals or the tribes, BIA staff will follow up. So today's agenda, I'm going to spend a couple minutes going over just the solicitation, about 10 minutes going over the background of Tiwahe, the requirements for the letter of intent, and then we'll spend 20 minutes on the application and information on expectations around what that letter of intent and application looks like. We'll review the resources that are available, the timeline, and then we will leave time at the end to answer any questions that you may have. So the biggest piece of information that I want to make sure you all have is that the solicitation closes on August 31st at 11:59 p.m. So if you are interested in applying for Tiwahe, those letters of intent need to be delivered to me via email by that date and time. My email is in the Dear Tribal Leader letter, as well as at the end of this slide deck. I do want to make sure that everyone is aware my name, first name is spelled Meghan. I like to say I did not have a vote in the spelling of Megan, but just make sure you do include that H. Otherwise, I will not get that letter of intent. And please know that I will send confirmation of receipt of that letter of intent within 48 hours of receiving it. So giving some background of Tiwahe. Tiwahe, the concept of Tiwahe was presented to Congress about 10 years ago, and Congress first appropriated funding for the Tiwahe Initiative and Demonstration Project in 2014. Through this funding, BIA was able to provide across-the-board increases to all eligible tribes, ICWA and social service funding in 2015. And I want to make sure that, and that's the biggest portion of the Tiwahe funding goes to those across the board increases, which were added to base and are reoccurring. And for ICWA, that was the first funding increase in ICWA-based funding since, I believe, 1994, so over 20 years. That provided through Tiwahe, those base increases were provided. In 2015, BIA invited 4 tribes to participate in the demonstration program, and then an additional 2 tribes were added in 2017. Funding for Tiwahe remained flat between fiscal years 2017 and 2021. However, in fiscal year 22, Congress appropriated an additional $2 million to expand the demonstration to additional tribes beyond the 6 at the time. We started that process last year, and out of that process, 35 tribes applied for inclusion in the program. Due to budgetary limitations, 2 tribes were selected, but we were also able to provide $1 million in one-time funding to 10 tribes. So 10 tribes received $100,000 for either planning or programming. And we are working with all 12 of those tribes, the 2 tribes that were selected. We're onboarding them now into Tiwahe, and we're currently working with those 10 tribes to define how they want to use that funding. In fiscal year 23, Congress appropriated an additional $2 million to further expand the demonstration in the social service and ICWA program areas. So that is the funding that we are working with through this solicitation program solicitation process, is that additional $2 million. So what is Tiwahe? Tiwahe Initiative helps tribes build communities of hope through cultivating culture and connection. Tiwahe is not a grant. I think the biggest thing I hear when I talk to tribes and go out into Indian country is the general frustration with grants, applying for grants, administering grants, the requirements of grants. It's a very frustrating process, and I want to be clear, Tiwahe is not that. It is meant to be reoccurring funding added to the base of the demonstration tribes. So the demonstration tribes have had except for the 2 new ones as they're still onboarding, Their funding through Tiwahe has been added to base. And so it's funding that the tribe can rely on year over year, as long as the program continues to be supported and funded by Congress. Tiwahe provides tribes with the freedom to design programs and integrate services within tribal culture and tradition. So other than grants, the other large complaint I hear is frustration around limitations on the type of programming tribes can implement, specifically the requirement that programming be evidence-based. Tiwahe does not have those same restrictions. The programming that a Tiwahe tribe can implement is flexible, and there is just a large emphasis on ensuring the programming integrates culture and tradition, and allows tribes to do that. Tiwahe is different than other funding that tribes receive from the government, primarily because it centers the tribe's voices and choices, and it's based on the tribe's knowledge and understanding of their community's needs. So it's tribally led. I say when I talk to our demonstration tribes own the program. BIA administers and provides support to the program. There are 7 program areas that Tiwahe covers: job placement and training, housing, ICWA, social services, pathways to wellness, which is our recidivism reduction program, tribal courts, and then in the 23 appropriations, we did receive $2 million to support wellness courts. Like I said previously, the funding that we are talking about in this solicitation is for social services and ICWA. I just wanted to go over the Tiwahe funding history a little bit for you all, so you can see how the different program areas have been funded, as well as the request for increases in 2024. So as you can see, in fiscal year 23 or 2015, Tiwahe started with a fairly modest budget of $11 million. $10 million was added in 2016, and then an additional $17 million was added in 17 for a budget of around $38 million. That budget, as you can see here, remained really flat between 2017 and 2021. So we were not able to add any additional tribes to the demonstration program. However, in fiscal year 22, you can see that an additional $2 million was added to this social service area, and we were able to use that funding to expand the demonstration by adding those 2 new tribes. In fiscal 23, you can see that we've received an additional $1 million in the social services and ICWA line items. And so that is what we're using to expand this program again. We have requested in the fiscal year 24, or the president's fiscal 24 budget has requested an increase of $33.5 million. That most of that increase is for the social services and the ICWA pieces. This would support adding on 10 new tribes. So by the end of fiscal year 23, we will have 8 tribes in the demonstration program. If we receive the full $17 million, we will be able to add an additional 10, expanding the demonstration program to 18 new tribes. This funding would also allow for additional across-the-board increases in social services and ICWA-based funding for all eligible tribes. We are also requesting a $2 million increase to the housing improvement area of the program, and an additional $1.8 million to increase the Healing to Wellness Court program. And then we would like to add a new piece to Tiwahe, which is economic development, which would support tribes and community members in a variety of ways, whether it's learning how to balance a checkbook, to helping tribes develop programs around that support grant writing and grant administration. Very broad, and like with most Tiwahe, it would be defined by the tribes and what they would like to see in terms of economic development. So that's the background on Tiwahe. I want to move to the requirements of the letter of intent. So the application requirements, because this is not a grant program, we wanted to make sure the application for Tiwahe was was easy, equitable, and transparent. So as many tribes could access the could request participation in the program as possible. So any federally recognized tribe, tribal organization, or consortia can apply. It doesn't matter your governance structure, self-governance, self-determination, direct services, and new tribes are all eligible to apply. The requirement is that you complete the application. We'll go through what the application will look like, and then make sure you submit it to me, Megan Bishop, at BIA.gov by August 31st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. What I would say generally about the application is that each tribe should identify their goals and or outcomes that they would like to achieve through participation in Tiwahe. Additional considerations for selection may include tribal leadership interest, community support for change, and the willingness for a tribe to be an active partner in the Tiwahe initiative. The application must include the face sheet. The face sheet is a new one-page document that was added with this round after the solicitation process, which was the first time we added new tribes in 7 years. In 22, we met internally with BIA as well as with our demonstration tribes, and we did some lessons learned. And one of the improvements that came out of that was this face sheet that we would ask that you would complete. It's included in the Dear Tribal Leader letter package, and it is a one-page fillable form. In addition, in terms of the letter of intent, we asked that the tribes address 3 things, which is 1, provide a general description of the background of the tribe, describe the issues that the tribe would like to use Tiwahe funding to address, and focus on what are the tribe's priorities. We'd also ask that you describe how the Tiwahe funding would be used to address the identified issues. What are the tribe's proposed outcomes? How would Tiwahe funding shape the future for the tribe's community and families? So this is what the top half of the face sheet looks like. It's just some general information about the tribe, which makes it easier for our reviewers to get that information, information about who the primary point of contact and secondary contacts are, the BIA region, the governance structure, information about who the tribal leadership is, and some additional just biographical information from the tribe, just so we have easy access to that. In terms of the first prong that the letter of the intent should address, the tribal background, we're looking for the tribe to describe the current demographics of the members and those serviced or in need of service, provide some evidence of support of tribal leadership and tribal members in Tiwahe, as well as the ability for the leadership and tribal members to effectively communicate. Tiwahe is a group effort, and we want to make sure that the tribes accepted into the program have the support of the community. We would also like to know if there's any current partnerships among local, tribal, county, state, and federal providers that would improve access to services for tribal children, youth, and families. So what's currently available. And what I'm going to say is this is not dispositive. We just want to know what tribes are currently accessing to address the issues in the community. It's informational. If tribes are not accessing all of the programs, that does not preclude you from inclusion in the Tiwahe initiative. The second prong is looking at the tribal priorities and needs, which would include an overall vision statement, current social indicators in those priority areas identified by the tribe. We'd like to know what are the tribe's gaps in delivering services or having capacity to assist tribal members, and how do those priorities and needs of the tribe that you identify in this section align with the Tiwahe funding lines and the outcomes framework. And I'll review the outcomes framework shortly. The final prong of the letter of intent should address proposed outcomes. and how those outcomes align with Tiwahe funding lines and the outcomes framework. We'd like to know willingness to implement infrastructure to support Tiwahe, including allocating human capital and complementing technology given tribal context and resource availability. The willingness to challenge existing thinking and thought to traditional and cultural family well-being outcomes, and the willingness to break down silos that exist between programs and activities within the tribal government, and a willingness to transform programs and activities in such a way that they help and enhance one another. So I had talked previously about the Tiwahe Outcomes Framework. Because the way Tiwahe works, each tribe is going to develop programming that makes sense for them. And what we found when we were evaluating that programming is how do we define a common language so we can report results to Congress to justify the continuance of the program. So what came out of that is the Tiwahe Outcomes Framework. And this was defined by the demonstration sites and is their breakdown of what, if all of these areas are met, this is the epitome of a happy, healthy, and safe community. And so the outcomes framework is divided into 3 levels: the individual, family, and tribal level, and 8 domains, which include participation in communities, nurturing relationships and connected families, safe and equitable justice and social welfare systems, healthy lifestyles, culturally and spiritually connected, economically secure, knowledgeable and empowered, and stewards of the environment and natural resources. So we use this framework to help identify strengths and weaknesses in the community, and also to, as we have identified those weaknesses, figure out which programming should be developed and implemented to address those weaknesses. So one of the examples I use is in the juvenile delinquency context. So for example, let's say you want to develop a alternative court for juveniles that are involved in the criminal justice system. And because you don't want to put them in detention anymore, you want to strengthen them within the community. So one of the things that I've seen tribes do is implement diversion programs that have experiential outdoor programming. So I use the example of rock climbing in the community. So rock climbing can hit a number of the domains. For example, we're doing this in the context of developing safe and equitable justice systems, because we are trying to, rather than detaining kids, we are trying to work with them within the community. Rock climbing can also help establish healthy lifestyles. If you're out in nature in your community, that could help the youth become a better steward of the environment and natural resources. If you are using elders or other traditional teachings as the youth are going through this rock climbing program, you're also potentially hitting the culturally and spiritually connected prong of this outcomes framework. So you can see in this example, the tribe is addressing a weakness. They had been previously detaining youth, and they don't want to do that anymore. They want to ensure that the youth can be dealt with in the community. So that is the weakness, and they've decided to implement this programming that is culturally based, and through that programming it hits a number of the different domains in the outcome framework. And hopefully at the end of the programming, you'll see improvement in the youth in those areas. And what will happen then is as that youth becomes more connected to the community through those domains, it improves the family and then improves the community as a whole. So in terms of resources, There, within the Dear Tribal Leader letter, there is the Dear Tribal Leader letter. There's also a Tiwahe selection framework, which provides a high-level overview of the Tiwahe initiative, the selection process, and frequently asked questions. We've also, this round, as the reviewers were evaluating the letters of intent, they developed a matrix to look at those 3 areas that we wanted the letters to address: the background of the tribe, the issues the tribe was facing, and how Tiwahe could address those issues. And so they developed this document to help evaluate the letters of intent and see where their letter aligns with those 3 areas. So we wanted to share this document with everyone because it does provide some additional context and information on how the reviewers review those applications. The considerations in this document focus on tribal governance, willingness to implement the framework, background and demographics, and these are all tied to the findings from the 2021 Tiwahe Congressional Report, which is located on the BIA website. I want, again, to be clear that no single consideration is dispositive for inclusion in Tiwahe. Some tribes that received funding or were invited to join the program in the past may not have had sophisticated programming or had significant gaps in certain areas that were identified, that would be identified in this document. What I think is really most important to the reviewers in the letter of intent is evidencing serious thought about the gaps in the community, how Tiwahe could address those gaps, but really about the level of interest and involvement the community is willing to make in participating. So if there's evidence of tribal leadership and interest in this, but also community interest was probably the most important consideration, because this process of Tiwahe, it's not just about getting funding, it's really about changing the way tribes interact with their community. And tribes through the planning process, which happens the first year, have to do a deep dive into looking at strengths and weaknesses. And this deep dive requires tribes to look inwardly into their government, speak to the community members in open and honest ways to develop a plan, to be able to develop a really strong plan of action. So as the tribes move forward in future years where they implement their plans, they're doing it in a way that really addresses the community and the tribe's needs. So the Dear Tribal Leader letter and accompanying documents are on the registration page for this, this webinar. You can also view the congressional report and appendices on the BIA Tiwahe website. By the end of the week, a video of this webinar, as well as the accompanying slide deck, will be on that same Tiwahe website. And then there was also an independent evaluation that was done as part of the congressional report. And so there's a link to that evaluation. I would encourage you, prior to writing your letter of intent, is review all of these documents to really get a really good understanding of the program and help you to focus in on answering those 3 areas, addressing those 3 areas in your letter of intent. So you can ensure that your letter of intent is really comprehensive. In terms of the timeline, we released the Dear Tribal Leader letter in May. The application period opened on June 1st. Obviously, you know, it's been 3 weeks, so hopefully a number of you have been able to review that Dear Tribal Leader letter. The applications are due on August 31st. We will be reviewing the applications in fall of 23. And we're going to do that in a way that was similar to how we did it last time. So to just let you know how the review went is the demonstration sites, as they're the tribe, those are the tribes that know what it takes to implement Tiwahe, and really have defined and made this program what it is. They do a blind review of the applications. So I strip the letters of intent of any identifying information that would give away which tribe it is. And then the tribes then rank those applications in terms in who the demonstration sites feel really evidence the embodiment of what Tiwahe is, and whether or not those tribes should be invited in the program. After that blind review, internally BIA does a full review of the applications. We have a fairly large a review team here that includes all the individuals that administer the 7 program areas, as well as leadership within BIA and the Asia hallway that do that review. I take myself out of the review because I want to be able to provide technical assistance to the tribes. So I will let you know that if you have any questions after today, I'm happy to sit down and talk to you and walk you through the letter of intent process and answer any questions you may have. And then we hope we will complete the application review, and we'll have new sites announced in the fall, October, November of 23, and then we'll begin onboarding those new sites in the beginning of 2024. So with that, I am ready for any questions. So please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions that you may have. Or the Q&A answer box as well is available. Oh, thank you, Amy. Amy, did you have any questions? Language immersion school is eligible. Like I said, the only limitation for Tiwahe funding is the tribe's imagination. And I know that sounds too good to be true, but I promise you it is true. Does the funding have to pertain to ICWA issues? No. What I will say is that the funding needs to address community well-being. And if you look at the outcomes framework, that is a broad mandate. So as long as your programming or proposal can logically and reasonably fit with within at least one of those outcome domains, you can use funding on that. Okay, I see Haley left hand has her hand up. I'm going to let you talk. Hopefully that worked. Okay, Haley, if you have a question, you just need to unmute yourself. Okay, so what types of things are being looked at to gauge community involvement and interest? I think that's a great question. Um, I, what I will say in terms of the reviewers, it really, who signed the letter of intent was really important. So just looking through the way things were ranked, if it was a someone from high up in tribal government, whether it was the chief or the chairman or vice chief or chairman, that was really helpful. Um, also, I would say too, if looking at the tribe in terms of the letter of intent, describing tribe, like if we're thinking about Tiwahe, it's really about de-siloing programs. So if the letter of intent addresses multiple program areas or government areas such as ICWA, social services, behavioral health, et cetera, and a desire to connect all of those, that is also helpful in gauging community involvement and interest. Benjamin, I will reach out to you directly about your question about where the native village of Notok falls under. Linda, we can set up a time next week to talk about that. I want to make sure. So the family advocacy coordinator. So that if a tribe is selected for inclusion in Tiwahe, the full Tiwahe program, there is a requirement that they hire a family advocacy coordinator, and that role is really a program manager. So during the first year of planning, that person would be leading the evaluation of the tribal needs, strengths, weaknesses, et cetera, and helping develop that plan. And then in subsequent years, that family advocacy coordinator would be helping with implementation. So it's very much a project management or program management role. You do not need to apply for separate funding for that role. But because if it's only a requirement if you become part of the Tiwahe program, and that funding would come out of your Tiwahe award. Okay, how many awards would be granted? So because we are currently funding tribes at around $1 million a year, $997,000 is the award. And we don't know if there's going to be any increases in Tiwahe in the future. We have to limit the awards to 2 tribes. We will probably do what we did this last year, because the first year, the planning year, tribes do not require that full $1 million, is due 2 awards to full Tiwahe tribes, and then an additional 10 one-time funding awards of $100,000 that could be used for planning or programming. Haley, left hand, any expectation on how long the letter of intent needs to be? No, it needs to be as long as you think it should be to fully address the questions that are posed in the Dear Tribal Leader letter. And so it just really depends on the tribal context and situation, because I think some tribes will have more information about the programming that they currently have, whereas tribes may not have a lot of programming, and so that would require a shorter letter of intent. Okay, so Linda, so for the one-time funding, we do need that submission for by the end of the month, but you are not locked in on your letter of intent, that if you want to amend it or edit it at all, you have until August 31st to make changes to your previous letter of intent. How many years is the funding for? There's a difference between one-time funding and the reoccurring. So the funding is added to base And so the funding, you don't need to reapply for it. If you are selected as a Tiwahe tribe, it's ongoing funding as long as Congress continues to fund the program. There is a difference between the one-time and the reoccurring. Yes, the reoccurring funding is for for tribes that are invited into the full demonstration project. The one-time funding is something that we started this year because of the level of interest in the program, and we wanted to acknowledge the need of the community and help in some ways. So that one-time funding is for planning or programming. And because of the nature of the way Congress has funded us, unfortunately, it only could be one-time non-reoccurring funding. The tribes, so Congress has allocated $2 million to the fiscal year 23 program. Like I said, tribes, once they're ready to implement, receive $1 million each. We are cutting that in half because the first year is a planning year, so the tribes will each receive $500,000 that first planning year. I can drop those links in the chat, so hold on. Maybe, we'll see. We will see how talented I am. Okay. Here is the link to the Deer Tribal. Here's the link to the Tiwahe website. Here is the link to the Deer Tribal Leader and face sheet. Benjamin, can you email me and we'll talk offline about that. But I am available just in general. I am available to speak with whomever you would like me to, anyone to provide technical assistance and guidance. And I'm happy to speak with tribal leadership as well about the program. And then I'm going to put my email in the chat as well. So you all have that. And then my phone number is 202-208-7163 if you'd like to speak on the phone as well. Right. I'm still keeping the floor open for questions. Oh, Candace, any indication on when Tiwahe will be opened up to all tribes and be made permanent and just not a demonstration project? No, what I will say, you know, this is a project that is supported by Secretary Holland, as well as Assistant Secretary Brian Newland. And in my conversations internally with the Assistant Secretary is we want this program to get to a point in terms of funding where any tribe who wants this funding can apply for it. What we need is more appropriations from Congress. That's the only limitation we have. This is the only reason it's competitive because we do get that limited funding from Congress. Like I said, you know, we've requested an increase of $33 million in the fiscal year 24 budget, which would allow us to expand which would allow us to double the program as well as provide additional base funding to the tribes. But it's going to be up to Congress on whether or not to fund it. I will say Senator Murkowski, Senator Tester, and numerous other senators have been really great partners, as well as representatives from Indian country on both sides of the aisle have been really phenomenal partners and have advocated for additional funding, even in difficult funding years. But the program is beholden to Congress and appropriations. It is not by BIA regions. It's going to be all the tribes. Any tribe can submit, or consortia can submit a letter of intent, and the process is that the demonstration sites do a blind ranking, but then internal BIA leadership makes the final selection. I will say we have 8 tribes right now, and they represent 7 regions. We do try to have that regional diversity. We also look at governance structure diversity as well. We don't have any direct service tribes right now, but we do have 638 and self-governance tribes. And then we also look at diversity in terms of size of the tribe, location of the tribe. Is it rural? Is it closer to more urban centers, things like that. Those are all considerations in making the selection. Is there a specific format to be used in the letter of intent? What I would just say, it's really, really helpful for the reviewers if you use the 3 areas as headers. So the background of the tribe, the tribal needs, and then the proposed outcomes. So if you separate your letter of intent into those 3 sections, that's really helpful. Can we find out what the demonstration projects are working on? Yes, that is located in the Tiwahe congressional report that I linked to in the chat. And if you Google BIA Tiwahe, you can find that congressional report, and you can see all of the really cool things that the programs have worked on. I can give you a couple examples right now. For AVCP, Association of Village Council Presidents in Alaska, they're a consortia representing 56 federally recognized tribes over a service area that's the size of Oregon. And for those of, I'm from Oregon, I would say it takes about 8 hours to drive across Oregon and 6 hours to drive north and south from Oregon. So that's the size of their service area. And one of the things that they focused on was developing a unified communications platform so they could get similar information out to their tribes. They also put together a really phenomenal resource booklet with the Tiwahe funding that provides local, state, and national information for those who are victims of abuse and or involved in MMIP issues. Pasquayaki, they've used their funding to help develop an ICWA court, a family navigator program, and they also used the funding to support the development of a foster child pack. So they have written 2 books that go into a backpack for foster children, along with a stuffed animal of Malachi the deer. And those 2 books are children's books that align and talk about Yaqui culture and tradition. So it's a way that if children need to be removed from their home and placed in foster care, they're still connected with their culture. Mountain Ute, they did one of the projects that they instituted was a bike path and walking trail that that connects culture to nature. And then Red Lake has really focused on youth issues, and they're using their Tiwahe funding along with other grant funding to open up a youth shelter and wellness shelter for youth. So you can see the programming is varied and really depends on the tribes and the community needs. Is there any resource assisting to assist writing the letter of intent, or is it up to the tribe to write the letter? It is up to the tribe to write the letter of intent. Like I said, I'm willing to sit down with tribes and provide technical assistance and guidance, but I am not able to provide any writing support. For the one-time award, how long do you have to spend it, or is there a requirement? There's a year to spend it. And I'll keep the, we're scheduled to go for another 10 minutes, so I'll keep the questions open for that time, just to make sure I'm answering everything that everyone has. So the process for the planning grant is, well, one, it's not a grant, it's funding. So what we have developed is that tribes can either choose to use the $100,000 to implement or develop programming, or to develop a Tiwahe plan. And so I meet with the tribes, I describe their options to them. We do require a tribal resolution or letter saying that they want to be involved in the program. We require a short narrative, no more than 2 to 3 pages, about regarding how they would like to spend the funding. And then we require a simple budget. And then we approve the plan and we send the funding out, and then we require 2 rounds of data collection. So after 6 months and after a year, the planning or programming funding that, so how that comes about is all tribes submit letters of intent with the purpose of becoming full Tiwahe sites. We then do the rankings and make the decision about the 2 tribes that will be invited to the full Tiwahe program. And then we look at the next 10 tribes in the decision making, and then we invite them to receive that one-time non-reoccurring $100,000. So it is not a separate program that you will apply for. No, if you've already passed a resolution for submission application, you do not need to pass another resolution for reapplication. And for those who have applied in the past, I am going to sit down. I'm willing to sit down with you after you've reviewed the new materials and go over your letter of intent and provide some guidance on areas of which you can improve. So I'm not going to provide information about the 35 tribes that applied. Or consortia. So, Maris, we at the agency cannot lobby. We can provide technical assistance and guidance. So we are Assistant Secretary Newland, when he was in front of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs last month, he spoke about the program. I provide technical assistance frequently around the program. That is to say, even though we can't lobby and we do provide that technical assistance, there is nothing prohibiting tribal members or tribes from reaching out to their representatives to talk about the importance of this program and the need for additional funding. Okay, if one becomes a Tiwahe participant, how does the project work? So we require, once you're selected, we do require a resolution saying that you would like to be part of the program. And then we provide technical assistance and guidance to the tribes, as well as peer-to-peer support from that the demonstration sites provide that first year in developing a Tiwahe plan. And that Tiwahe plan process is an intensive look at the tribe's strengths and weaknesses and what is needed to address those strengths and weaknesses to help the community. After that Tiwahe plan process is done, tribes are ready to implement the recommendations, and we will support the tribes in whatever way the tribes want us to support them. There's also data collection requirements, and that's because this continues to be a demonstration program, and we do need to report to Congress around the success of the program. So as part of the Tiwahe planning and implementation project, we help define what data the tribe is going to collect and share so we can provide that information to Congress. How do you know if your project can be sustained if you don't know how much funding you have to use until afterwards? So I don't quite understand this question. So Congress has sustained this program for almost 10 years now. They are in support of the program. The only way that a tribe would lose funding is if Congress stops supporting this program, but that's the same for grants as well. So like I said, the first year, which is the planning year, if you are selected as a Tiwahe tribe, you receive $500,000. In subsequent years, you receive $997,000, and that amount is transferred to your base, to the tribal base. The tribe then can rely on that funding in perpetuity as long as Congress continues to fund that program. Laura, yes. If tribes are part of a consortia, they are able to do their own application for Tiwahe as long as there's nothing in the consortia agreement that prevents a tribe from doing something like that. There's still a few more minutes left. I want to make sure I answer all the questions. I really appreciate this, everything that you're asking, and the level of interest. And just so you're aware, if you think of another question after we get off this webinar, you do have my email and my phone number. Please feel free to reach out. I will make myself available as available as possible. And I appreciate everyone's interest and participation today, Quiana. And just so you know, I am Sukpiak and a member of the native village of Fognak. I forgot to do that introduction. So I have a special place in my heart for all of Indian country, but especially Alaska. So I do really appreciate everyone being on the call today. And again, your interest in this program. I think it's a phenomenal program. And, you know, I hope with the continued high level of interest that Congress gets the message and will fund it the way that it needs to be funded. So thank you so much. You have a wonderful day, and I really look forward to all of your letters of intent. Thank you.